Definitely shouldn't have had that cheesecake. Could actually do with a lie down after that cheesecake.
1 minute.
Uno momento. Gracias. That's the limit of my Spanish. Okay, hello, thank you. Yeah, it's nice to be back in person, as we were saying. It's been a long time. 2020, the last time I was at an actual physical event, which seems like absolutely ages ago. I think that was the last time I saw Michael there. And yeah, it feels good to be back in person. From the people in the room now, quick show of hands. Who's kind of working? You know, who's working on the enterprise side of things? So who's working at an organisation? One deploying conversation. Who's working on the kind of like technology vendor side of things? Service provider, technology provider. Okay, so there's a good mix. Fair enough. Hello, Entor. Hello, Micah. Come in, take a seat. Cool. So. Of everyone in the room, it sounds as though, given the material that we've been talking about, it sounds as though there's quite a few experienced people in here. Who in the room has deployed something in the last 12 months? All right. Who's planning on deploying something in the next 12 months? Pretty much everyone. That's good. Cool. That is good. Okay then, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of conversation design, which is a bit of a weird thing to discuss, given that we can't really see the future, can't really predict the future. If you'd have saw 2020 Kane and you'd have said to 2020 Kane that 2022 Kane is going to wake up one day in Edinburgh and the first thought that's going to come into his head is, oh my God, I've forgot my hairdryer, then that would have been a completely unreal thing for me to say, because I have had short hair all of my life. And so you can't really see what the future kind of brings. And so in a field like this, where technology, as we've seen from Jeff and we've seen from Mark and we've seen from a few people today already, the Open Dialogue team, the technology is changing so rapidly that it's obvious that we're not quite done yet with figuring this out. I mean, what everybody wants, all of those that are either going to deploy something soon or those that have deployed something, what everybody wants is that sort of like ideal customer experience, don't they? They want this natural interface, this kind of like fluid, frictionless interface where people can use their own language. Doesn't matter how they phrase it, what device they're on, what kind of language they speak, what accent they might have. Everything kind of works in a fluid kind of fashion. And that's where we're all kind of trying to get to. And I would say that today, this talk, I suppose, is even just a snapshot in time. And I don't know how true things will be even in kind of like 12 months' time. But if you were to kind of rewind a little bit to like 2015. Like Tom, when did you build your first Alexa skill? 2017. Even 2017 is decent. So 2017, what was the Alexa skills kit like? Exactly. So the Alexa skills kit, most of the kind of chatbot platforms, Whitney AI, all of that kind of stuff, very code heavy, command line interfaces, a lot of the cases. And so it required extreme kind of like definitely technical knowledge to be able to build stuff. There wasn't really any of those low-code things that we have today. All of the dialogue management had to be built and coded. So every time you built an app, you had to basically build a dialogue manager and hook that up to your NLU system. And so today, we've made tremendous progress. We've got tools now. We've saw the Open Dialogue tools. There's so many low-code drag-and-drop tools that make this stuff kind of easy. And so we've made great progress as far as technology is concerned, but at the same time, there's almost like a culture beginning that is kind of like almost establishing this status quo, which is why I've kind of been actually quite pleased with a lot of the content that's been here today, because it's been a lot about how do we get better, how do we make things better. So most organizations that deploy chatbots and voice bots and stuff like that, the automation rate, the level of success varies absolutely wildly. Some are automating 30%, some, as we've heard anecdotally, 80%, 90% in some cases, but it completely varies wildly. And I think the reason is because we're kind of settling on some practices that I think that is easy to fall into, and especially those that haven't necessarily done it before. If you're an organization trying to build a conversational AI solution, you might not necessarily have the budget to go and outsource that to an external team. You might have some people internally that might be able to, take that on, some developers or maybe some designers or something like that. You might bring in a tool to do it. And so there is a lot of newcomers entering into the industry. There is a lot of kind of like established practices which we're seeing emerge, which is good from the perspective of, 5 years ago, when every single person that was building anything siloed across the world were kind of just making it up and figuring it out as we go along. The term conversation design wasn't really a thing in 2017 when you built your first skill, Tom. VUI design obviously was. VUI design goes back into the 90s with Nuance and a bunch of other companies that were trying to establish voice AI in the call center. But conversation design has only really become a thing and a term that we've used over the last, I would say, probably 3 years or so, which is really just shows how new this emerging field is. Facebook launched Facebook Messenger, the ability for third parties to build into Facebook Messenger about 2016. Alexa obviously was 2014, but didn't really hit the UK till 2017. Didn't really become a household name till 2018, 2019. And so it's kind of, what I'm trying to say is that essentially it's a very new still emerging industry, but at the same time, for those that are new into it, the tools that we use, which are miles better than they were in 2015, 2016, still I think leave a few room for improvement, because some of the tools, or most tools, are used by the idea of the tools that we use is that you can use them without needing to know much about them. So if you pick up a hammer, it's kind of fairly obvious what that is supposed to do. It's supposed to hit things. You're not going to try and screw a nail in with a hammer. Same thing if you get into a car or something like that. It's not obvious how to drive a car, but you need to use tools. You need to use the pedals, the gear stick, the steering wheel in a very particular way to make the car move. And so the tools that we have available today, although they're far better than they were in 2015, I think there's the way we use them essentially, I think needs to improve. So there's a couple of things I think that we need to stop doing, a few things that we need to start doing, and underneath all of this, there's technology that's emerging that is essentially, I think, going to change the way conversation design happens. So if I look at the teams that are more engineering-led, I think David Lowe actually alluded to some of this earlier on in one of his slides. Teams that are engineering-led, in terms of their framework of how they approach conversation design, they tend to kind of start with intents first. So the very first thing they do is, okay, we need to do this thing. We know that we want to cater for people saying these kind of things, so here's our intents. And they build a bank of intents. And that's kind of natural because the tools that are available lead them into that kind of approach. Because if you open Dialogflow ES, you open some of these, Watson or something like that, the first thing you see is a page with a list on it. And the first thing at the top is welcome. And so it forces you into this, let's just list out our intents. And once we've listed our intents, we'll start defining our entities and slots. Then we'll try and define our training data, which we've covered. Michael's covered it, a few others have covered it. That training data based on assumptions is going to get you pretty much nowhere, because you can't design a conversation with one half of the conversation partner not with you at the time. And so the first thing that ends up happening is that you stick this thing full of assumptions. You start by defining intents and slots and entities, and then defining training data. And then you try and wrap all of that in a state machine. And that was a process that David Lowe outlined earlier on, which was what Skyscanner did when they very first started. And that's naturally how technically minded teams tend to kind of start. So at the same time, you've got design-led teams that at least start with, let's define our use cases first. Let's figure out what this thing should do and what needs it needs to serve. But then the issue is that we fall into this trap because the low-code building tools lure us into this flow kind of first design. And so we get caught into this trap, which is we need this thing to do these three things, and how are we then going to get users to do these three things? best thing to do is just stick a welcome kind of message at the beginning and give them 3 options. We'll throw them into a bucket, and then we'll kind of do as best as we can to keep them trapped in this bucket to get to the end of it. And anyone knows that, making assumptions about what people are likely to talk about or having huge assumptions about building out this flow based on, again, assumptions isn't likely how people actually have a conversation. So, and I'm not blaming the tools, because compared to command line interfaces of 2015, the tools are absolutely fantastic. And the practice and the processes that we have now, at least, are far better than they were in 2015 as well. The issue is that the way that we use the tools that we have, I think, needs to improve. And that's the symptoms of this is normally because either we've got a very technical team with no designers, or we've got a very creative team with no technical kind of input. And so what's missing in that is, one is cross-discipline teams, and 2 is research. So I think might have been Micah earlier on that mentioned that before you design a line of dialogue, you should be doing research. And that's kind of what is missing. I've worked with large organizations, small organizations, consultancies that work with organizations across the globe, and there is established design teams that are leading the conversational AI charge that start by saying, we've got 3 use cases, let's stick a welcome message on it and try and get people into these intents. Rather than, who are our customers? What are they actually talking about in terms of what conversations are they having? What language are they using? In what channels are they having those conversations? And how can we figure out how to take that data, let's say, for example, listening to call recordings, reading live transcripts, reading email chains, reading social exchanges, reading email logs. And when I say reading, I think that, Micah, you kind of touched on it, which is that, yes, large organizations with multi-millions of interactions will use tools to automate some of this. But from a designer's perspective, it doesn't matter if you're using tools to automate it. You have to become familiar with how your customers and users are talking, and you need to understand and be able to empathize with the various ways and twists and turns that these conversations are going to have. You're only going to be able to figure out where a conversation starts, what kind of twists and turns happen throughout the conversation, and where it's likely to end if you've done a degree of research. Now, there is tools out there that will help you with this. Mark, you outlined Evo. That sounds like it could be a really good tool. There's a tool called Human First, which allows you to do exactly what I've kind of described, take data from a whole bunch of different systems in a whole bunch of different places, aggregate it all together, and start to map out what people are actually talking about and how people talk. And it's not that you need to necessarily take every single line that someone said and use that as training data. That's not kind of what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is that you should get your training data from some kind of realistic grounding, because you can't assume how people talk and what people talk about without doing any research whatsoever. And so that's the one thing I think needs to improve is we need to be doing a lot more research, and we need to be having a more research-led approach. Secondly is that designers and development teams definitely need to work closer together, because technical teams with pure technical resources, no designers, and design teams with pure designers and no technical resource all kind of end up falling into the same kind of trap. And so having this kind of interdisciplinary team, which begins with research and designers and developers working closer together, I think is definitely where the short-term future of conversation design is. And I know that's very similar to Raza. Is Raza in the room? I know there's someone from Raza here. Yeah. So that's your conversation-driven development framework is kind of that, basically, which is designers, creatives, and technical people together using actual customer insight to iteratively improve conversational models. So that's kind of the one thing I would say. The other thing is that at the same time, there is technical advancements that we're seeing that, again, have the potential to completely change what we know as conversation design. Natural language understanding and the classification of natural language queries, if you like, for want of a better word, is kind of fundamentally a technical problem. I think, Micah, you had some really good points about the linguist side of it and how a linguist can help to shape that kind of training data in order to feed the system with the right kind of data. But that classification is a fundamental technical problem. And so there's been lots of things happening in the industry to try and solve some of this stuff. So if you look at most organizations that have deployed a chatbot using something like Watson, which is kind of like the most common chatbot platform to use for enterprises, the level of automation or containment, as it's, I think, probably wrongly known, is at max kind of like 85% or 80% or something like that. And that's just containment. That's people who start a chat and kind of stay in the chat. It's not necessarily people who've had their query actually resolved successfully. And so the the challenge for the advancement of natural language understanding systems is how do you get your kind of automation rate, for want of a better word? How do you increase the success of your conversations, essentially, is the question. Because some of the intent-based NLU systems have a hard time breaking out of that kind of like 80% automation. It's because, again, Micah, you highlighted some things, which is that, and I think it might have been, was it Jeff or someone else who highlighted that the more that you scale, the greater there is likely to be conflicts between your intents. It's just absolutely inevitable. And if you've got an organization that's like a global bank, we saw Ashish from Standard Chartered operating globally across the world, you will reach the limits of some of these intent-based NLU systems at some point in time, because you're going to have intents that are either similar, you're going to have incredibly complex dialogue management, which is another challenge that we haven't really solved. For those of you that have used some of the tools like Dialogflow or something similar to design even moderately sophisticated conversations, you will know that you tie yourself up in knots immediately. I worked on something for one of the banks in America, and it was a retirement-based thing. And the conversation, basically every single thing someone said, we had to basically make a record of it because it matters to the conversation. It will fundamentally change the guidance that they're given at the end. And so absolutely, at every single time, you need to recognize what someone said, check back to previous answers to try and gather context of the conversation to figure out what could come next, what prompts should come next, what advice should come next. And it was the most complex thing I've ever seen. It's just this spaghetti junction, and it's just one small use case for one large bank, and it took months. And so you'll very quickly get tied up trying to build state management machines or dialogue engines that are able to handle these complex conversations. And so underneath the surface, we've got technologies that are trying to solve this problem. So one example is a company called Hyro. They work a lot in healthcare, and they've got a similar approach to what Jeff was highlighting earlier on. Essentially what they do, and this is the impact for conversation designers, is that Hyro have this like knowledge graph-based approach to conversation design. So let's say, for example, that you were working with something like the NHS, and you wanted to have all of the NHS's content, information-based content to answer people's questions, and also all of the services that the NHS has, booking doctor's appointments, booking hospital appointments, booking dentist appointments, whatever. If you wanted to have all of that available via a chatbot, you would be thinking that to design a conversation like that, it's going to take us forever because there's just too much data. The way that Hyro's system works is that essentially it just builds a knowledge graph based on all of this data and all of these services, has relations between that knowledge graph, and essentially the conversation design part is a process of elimination and narrowing down data. And what I mean by that is, let's say that figuratively speaking, let's say that it was an NHS chatbot, and you said, the first thing you said to it was, I've got a toothache. It would have a look at the data that it has, and it will say, well, we've got a bunch of content about all this other stuff that's not related to teeth. It's obviously nothing to do with that, so let's get rid of that. We've got all of this stuff about doctors' surgeries and hospitals and stuff like that. It's a tooth thing, so it's probably not related to that. It's likely to be something to do with dentists and this content that we have based on teeth, right? So we've narrowed down all of the NHS data available to two different kind of subsets, which is information on teeth and information on dentists where they can fix teeth. And then it will generate a prompt that says something like, do you need guidance and help with your tooth, or are you trying to actually get something sorted? Do you need to book an appointment? And the user will say one of those two things. And depending on that, it will narrow the data down again. Let's say if I say I think I need someone to see it and have a look at it. It narrows that, it gets rid of all the information stuff, and it just focuses on dentists. And then how can you narrow down all of the dentists in the whole country? Maybe it's location. So where are you? Well, I'm in Edinburgh. And it narrows it all down to Edinburgh. So in 3 conversational turns, you've gone from the world's information down to specifically dentists in Edinburgh. And so that's the kind of Hyro approach to conversation design. And for technologies like that, the role of a conversation designer is much about taking that content, finding it, because some organizations don't have it available, or some have it, but it's in a terrible format, and writing and crafting content that is able to be read, first of all, because as we've seen, chatbots and stuff like that need to have succinct information that's spoken a language that's aligned to the personality of the bot that's thinking it. And also crafting content that's intended to be said, because as Greg touched on, content that's there to be said is different to content that's there to be read. We speak differently to how we write. And then you've got technology underneath that, which is kind of building on a similar methodology to the GPT-3 concept with transformer models and that kind of stuff. Got to AI, Jason Mars from Got to AI, I think is speaking tomorrow perhaps, or maybe it's later today. zero-shot bot that is, but there's another one called Got It AI. And there's a bunch of others that use these transformer models to do the things that chatbots traditionally find very difficult to do with intent-based systems, which is FAQs. Now, yes, you could say that the value of a conversational interface is that it gets stuff done for us, but an overwhelming majority of organizations start with FAQs because they do have people getting in touch with them to try and get answers to questions. And intent-based NLU systems are typically quite hard to do that because if I say to a chatbot or a voice bot or a voice assistant, what's my credit card rate? And someone else says, what's your credit card rate? There's only one word different in that sentence, but the whole thing is completely different because one is asking, what rates have you got for me to have now if I buy a new credit card? And the other one is, what's my rate based on my context and the product that I've got? And so intent-based NLU systems traditionally struggle with this kind of stuff, and some of these transformer models are kind of making waves to try and break down some of this stuff. And so again, from a conversation designer's perspective, again, the job will be more about content definition, organizing content, working with data scientists to make that content available, and then crafting content that's fit for the channel it's going to be distributed through. The third type of technology is technologies that's really kind of like deep technology, companies like Action AI and others that are kind of like, based on research, Poly AI that Jeff was mentioned was working with. This is technology that you probably wouldn't want to touch even if you could, because it uses a totally different approach to natural language understanding. It's not like an out-of-the-box NLU like Google Dialogflow, where you can just go in there and blast out a few intents and knock up a prototype. It uses proper semantic understanding and ontologies and a whole range of things from computer linguistics and all that kind of stuff that is able to try and classify intents or utterances at a much higher degree. So Action AI is automating rather than the 80% of Dialogflow, it's 90% and above. And so if you think about a large bank having millions of conversations across a multitude of different channels, getting 10% more accuracy or 10% more success from your conversations is not only a massive increase in customer experience and NPS and all that kind of stuff, but it's also a huge money saver. And then finally, we're also seeing a lot of very domain-specific natural language understanding systems as well. So, I think someone from Core AI is down to speak either today or tomorrow, I think. So Core AI have got this product called Bank Assist, which if you're a bank, you can just go and buy that product, and within 30 days, you can have an assistant that's already pre-built, pre-trained on 150 different intents that you can launch, providing you can get access to your systems quickly enough. 30 days is a bit ambitious for banks, I would say. But Casisto's got the same kind of thing. You look at companies like Redroot, which basically will outsource most of your calls if you're a taxi firm or something like that. They've already built the conversations that manage that whole journey. You don't need to do it anymore. There's a company in Poland that has completely booked and nailed appointments for booking appointments with hairdressers and stuff like that. So that conversation's being solved. The more we see domain-specific understandings and conversations being solved, the less kind of room there's going to be for creative. I'm going to wrap up. There's going to be less room for organizations to build their own stuff. And so conversation designers might find opportunities finding companies that are working on this domain-specific stuff, because as more organizations try and just productize or buy products, there's going to be less room for people and companies to build some of this stuff themselves. So this is generally speaking, I know I've kind of gone around the houses here, but this is generally speaking a lot of the stuff that I've been observing over the last kind of 12 months or so, I would say, is that on the design side, using the tools that we've got are genuinely fantastic and miles better than where they were. I just think we need to have frameworks and practices that allow us to use those tools and extract more value out of them. And that framework and practice comes with user research at the front end and cross-functional design and development teams in the middle to be able to launch and iterate consistently based on actual user feedback. And then at the same time, there's technology coming underneath the surface, bubbling along, that's going to change, I think, as we'll see over the next 5 years or so, I would think, it's going to change kind of the way that some conversation design teams operate. So, if you want to learn a bit more about this kind of stuff, please do go to vux.world. Every week we do about 2 podcasts, we publish articles, LinkedIn, that kind of stuff. And we're doing 2 events of our own. One with Servion and Cisco, which is all about implementing Google CCI in your call center. So if you're interested in that, please do go to subscribe. And also one with DeepGround, which is all about how to properly utilize and increase the accuracy of speech recognition systems, which is the fundamental blockage to a lot of poor NLU performance, because you put crap in, you get crap out. So yes, I've been Kane Sims of VUX World, and thank you very much.